You are watching the National News Desk, America's News Now.
It's become clear to me is we need a shift in paradigm in how we conduct our protective operations.
The Secret Service admits failures in the Pennsylvania assassination attempt that almost took the life of the former president, what they say they're doing to hold themselves accountable. Then Springfield, Ohio continues to receive negative attention for rumors about pet-eating migrants. Just ahead, the Ohio Republican now hitting back on the claims in his strongest condemnation yet. And toxic school meals. We'll tell you which ingredients are in fact contaminants and what we now know about a bold new bill that could change what's inside your child's lunch. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Tonight, the Secret Service revealing it believes it needs a paradigm shift in how it conducts security operations after not one but two perceived failures that began on July 13th when a gunman shot and almost killed former President Donald Trump while at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe saying today the investigation into that shooting moving now into its accountability phase.
The Mission Assurance Review has identified deficiencies in the advanced planning and its implementation by Secret Service personnel. These employees will be held accountable, and this agency has among the most robust table of penalties in the entirety of the federal government.
While admitting robust penalties were in store for certain individuals, Rose said he would not share more details about their identities, their roles at the Secret Service, and the extent of their punishments. The update coming just hours after learning the House unanimously voted 405-0 to pass a bill bolstering Secret Service protection for major presidential and vice presidential candidates, a move that comes less than a week after the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump. If signed into law, Trump and Harris would be granted the same standard of Secret Service protection as President Joe Biden. The bill now heads to the Senate. While there's a consensus on Secret Service protection, that's not quite the case for a pending spending bill. The House tonight working on a plan B after the party's strategy to keep the government funded failed to pass out of the Republican-led chamber this week, leaving them less than 10 days to get the job done. The failed bill included a 6-month stopgap along with the SAVE Act, which would require proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, something most Democrats are against and say shows Republicans are looking to play politics.
You need a bipartisan agreement to get things done, and hopefully Speaker Johnson will learn that.
Johnson tonight remaining steadfast that a deal can be reached, despite pushback from his Republican colleagues that this is risky behavior.
We'll come up with a solution. We have time to fix the situation.
The one thing you cannot have is a government shutdown. It would be politically beyond stupid for us to do that right before the election, because certainly we'd get the blame.
Democrats are pushing for a 3-month funding plan with no attachments. A passed bill needs to get to President Biden's desk by the end of the month to avoid that government shutdown. 6 firefighters from Orange County, California are still in the hospital after their fire truck overturned on a highway. 2 others are injured. Authorities saying they were driving back from a 12-hour shift fighting the 23,000-acre airport fire yesterday. The extent of their injuries is unknown, but the county fire chief says they will have to stay in the hospital for a while. A sheriff in Letcher County, Kentucky, Sean Mickey Steins, is charged with first-degree murder in the death of District Judge Kevin Mullins. Kentucky State Police say the initial investigation shows Steins shot Mullins after an argument in the courthouse yesterday. Steins surrendered at the scene. Police are working to determine a motive. We do know that Steins is facing a lawsuit that accuses him of failing to investigate sexual assault allegations. At least 14 people are dead, more than 60 wounded in a new Israeli airstrike inside Beirut today. And you can see the smoke rising here right over the city. Israel saying that they were targeting and eliminated the new military chief of staff of Hezbollah's elite Radwan forces, Ibrahim Akil, as well as others in the command chain. Hezbollah confirming Akil's death, but no one else's. Israel said earlier this week that they are in a new phase of war, which seemingly has included the electronics attack over 2 days that killed more than 37 and wounded thousands, including some civilians. Hezbollah responded with rocket attacks into northern Israel. President Biden today said his team is still working on a much-needed diplomatic solution.
We're continuing to try to do what we tried from the beginning to make sure that both the people in northern Israel as well as southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes and go back safely. And the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, our whole team is working in the intelligence community to try to get that done. We're going to keep at it till we get it done, but we've got a way to go.
The United Nations Security Council met today to discuss that electronics attack in Lebanon. U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres warning that everything must be done to avoid war escalation. Arab states asking the council to look into whether or not this attack was a legitimate military operation, as at least 2 children were among the dead. Some nurses and doctors also reported to be among the casualties. And a live look now over Springfield, Ohio. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine calling out both former President Donald Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, for their comments about Springfield in a new op-ed in the New York Times just today. Governor DeWine says the stories of migrants, namely Haitians, eating pets is simply false, and this depiction is not the one he sees in Springfield, Ohio. He also called out these comments as a source of potential violence. The state says it has had at least 20 bomb threats called so far this week. Yesterday, Springfield Mayor Rob Rue proclaimed a state of emergency.
Up until today, the threats that we have been receiving, bomb threats, threats in our lives, things like that. So, additional security contracts and things like that that we need to put in place are the reason for this proclamation of emergency. We are not in a state of emergency, but we are just able to function as one that needs to answer the risk.
Climate activists are holding protests in cities around the world today, organized by the group Fridays for Future. The New York chapter planned a march across the Brooklyn Bridge, followed by a rally. One organizer said they're taking aim at companies that pollute and leaders who aren't doing enough. More protests in New York are scheduled for this weekend. 3 Mile Island could soon, relatively speaking, be back up and running with an agreement to sell its power directly to Microsoft. The famous nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania suffered the worst nuclear accident in the history of the United States in a fallout in 1979. Pending approval by the Regulatory Commission, the plant will reopen in 2028 and create around 3,400 jobs. It's expected to bring $16 billion to Pennsylvania's GDP and more than $3 billion in state taxes. A jury must decide the fate of a schizophrenic man who killed 10 people at a supermarket in Colorado now that lawyers have given their closing arguments. Ahmed Alissa pleaded not guilty because of insanity in the 2021 attack in Boulder. Defense attorneys say Alissa was legally insane, while prosecutors accuse Alissa of trying to kill as many people as possible. The Boeing machinist strike has been going on for over a week with no estimates for when it will end. The president of the machinist union in Seattle said the first round of mediation wasn't promising.
I think a lot of people are pretty prepared, to ride it out for quite some time.
It's easy for them to be positive because we're only 1 week into it, and all the hourly people have received their last paycheck today, so the pinch will come later on.
Union negotiators told members there are no dates scheduled for additional mediation. This as a looming strike on the East Coast has economists very worried. Tens of thousands of dock workers along the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coasts threatening to walk off the job within the next 2 weeks. If a strike happens, dozens of industries could feel the effects. The National News Desk's Jeff Harris has more.
Dock workers are focusing on two things: better pay and the ban on the automation of cranes, gates, and container movements. The International Longshoremen's Association says if those conditions aren't figured out by October 1st, they will strike. Jason Miller, a professor of supply chain management at Michigan State, tells us the ILA is looking for pay increases around 77 to 78%.
That is far higher than the roughly 32 to 39% that have been offered by the USMX.
Miller says the union is also demanding automation gets kept the way it is,
because it views automation as a threat to jobs.
If a strike does happen, over 40,000 dock workers along the U.S. East and Gulf Coasts will walk off the job on October 1st, something Miller says is concerning since those ports process between 50 and 60% of the goods that come into the U.S.
This is millions upon millions of tons of freight,
including auto parts, a specific industry Miller believes will significantly feel the effects of a strike.
The German automakers with operations in the southern United States, they're importing a lot of components from their suppliers in Germany.
Piyush Shah, a professor who also focuses on supply chain management, tells us, aside from the auto industry, these ports also handle a lot of agriculture and poultry.
These time-sensitive cargo, we might see a lot of damages.
Plus, he says imports from Europe like wines, spirits, beer, and certain chemicals could be impacted as well.
All European imports are more in danger than the Chinese.
Now, if a strike does happen, experts say ports on the West Coast could pick up some of that additional cargo, but not all of it. Neither could the U.S. rail system. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
Jeff, thank you. Sean Diddy Combs on suicide watch as he awaits trial in a New York City jail. A source familiar with the situation says this is procedural for high-profile clients. The rapper is charged with 3 felony accounts, including racketeering and sex trafficking, linked to allegations of abuse spanning over a decade. He was denied bail, but his lawyers still want to try to get him out before his trial. Coming up, the controversial change to election rules in Georgia that's been approved as early voting begins. Then overdose deaths on the decline, how the latest numbers compare to what we saw before the pandemic. And later, Springfield is not the only town dealing with an influx of immigration. Why leaders in Lockland, Ohio say they are at a tipping point. We're back in 90 seconds. This election year, we're expecting the trend of early voting to continue. Voting for this year's election now underway as early in-person voting begins in 3 states. Virginia residents can vote early now through November 2nd. People in Minnesota and South Dakota can now turn in absentee ballots in person instead of through the mail. Meantime, Idaho, Maryland, New York, and West Virginia must send out their absentee ballots today. And a change to elections in Georgia has been approved by the state election board. A new rule requires counties to hand count ballots cast at polling places on election day. An official working for the state attorney general warned this would probably be ruled invalid if challenged in court. But a board member who voted for the rule said it's necessary to ensure accuracy. And Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein will not appear on the Nevada general election ballot. Today, the Supreme Court upheld a lower court's decision in favor of Democrats. A lawyer from the Nevada Democratic Party argued the Green Party used the wrong form to gather signatures. The Federal Trade Commission is out with what it calls a groundbreaking report about the operations of the video streaming and social media platforms millions of Americans use every day and how they've allegedly violated users' privacy. National correspondent Natrel Nashar has a closer look at that report.
A new government report details a so-called market of commercial surveillance happening right on your smartphone. This Federal Trade Commission report, 4 years in the making, alleges that between 2019 and 2020, these 9 companies collected and shared more personal information of users and non-users than many realized, had lax privacy controls, and inadequate safeguards for underage users. Their goal, the FTC says, keeping people hooked. Using their data to sell advertising services is how they can make billions off of free service. Discord said the FTC report is not accurate. X and Google, which owns YouTube, also defended their policies after the report came out. Under scrutiny from Washington, tech companies have long stood by their practices and intentions.
We built Family Center in Snapchat, where you can view who your teen is talking to, review privacy settings, and set content limits.
We give our users a lot of tools to control their privacy settings on our app.
Even the FTC acknowledges its findings are limited. They only examined how the companies operated in 2019 and 2020. Since then, platforms and business models have changed. Being behind the curve has been Congress's problem, too.
Will you commit to ending Finsta?
By the time most lawmakers are up to speed on the latest platforms and how they work, let alone advance legislation to regulate it, the technology has changed.
It's long overdue, but it's just like we have to act.
Lack of regulation from Congress over the years has given these companies nearly free rein, the FTC says. Parents have also taken notice and are calling for accountability from both tech companies and Congress for the sake of this generation and the next. Because, as the FTC says, we still know so little about companies that know so much about us. In Washington, I'm Natrel Nashar for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
Almost 450,000 GM SUVs and pickup trucks are being recalled because the display light might not function correctly following a loss of brake fluid. Without proper notice, drivers could have a higher danger of a crash. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says that 2023-24 Cadillac Escalades, Chevy Silverados, Tahoes, and Suburbans, as well as the GMC Yukon models, are at risk. A software update is available to fix the problem. The Federal Trade Commission suing prescription drug middlemen for artificially inflated insulin prices. The FTC says the country's 3 largest pharmacy benefit managers and their affiliated group purchasing organizations created a broken rebate system to drive up prices and boost their own profits at the expense of patients. The commission says drug manufacturers play a role in the price hike. Insulin is a life-saving medicine for millions of patients with diabetes. Overdose deaths are at their lowest level in 3 years. According to new CDC estimates, around 101,000 people died from overdoses in the 12 months ending in April. And that's still higher than where we were before COVID, the numbers increasing with the pandemic and starting to decrease last year. Doctors say some factors could be better treatment programs, public awareness, access to naloxone, and changes in the drug supply. In a surprise announcement, a senior U.S. senator is calling for toxic ingredients to be removed from school lunches. Heavy metals, pesticides, and PFAS among the contaminants being consumed by kids every single day. Spotlight on America national investigative correspondent Lisa Fletcher tells us about the bold new bill and how it connects to a special investigation she's got coming up next week.
I think it is more of a crisis than most Americans can even begin to realize. And one of the challenges is not just making food available, but making sure it's quality, healthy food that's not making our children sick.
New proposed legislation on the front of a Spotlight on America investigation, taking a deep dive into what's actually in school lunches being served to millions of kids every day. Unseen, largely unregulated components, increasingly connected to everything from attention deficit disorder and liver disease to hormone disruption and cancer.
We can fight back and make sure that kids are getting the safest, most nutritious meals possible. And that's why I'm introducing today the Safe School Meals Act.
This week, Senator Cory Booker introduced new legislation targeting what he called toxic ingredients on school lunch trays across America, proposing standards that would keep kids safe from poisons that can't be seen on the plate. Spotlight on America has been investigating those poisons in groundbreaking exclusive tests on school lunch samples. What did you find?
We found quite a lot of not so desirable things,
including dozens of pesticides, including those tied to cancer and developmental issues, and heavy metals known to be toxic to the brain. Our findings concerned leading experts in the field, like an epidemiologist who's studied pesticides for decades.
50 pesticides in school lunches, it's not okay. It really isn't.
And the chief scientific officer of the lab that conducted our tests.
We should be feeding our children food that is not contaminated with things that can make them sick, can interfere with their health, and interfere with their ability to grow and evolve and learn.
With a national conversation now initiated in Washington, we'll reveal our full results on toxins being consumed by kids in school lunches, plus more on Senator Booker's plans to make those invisible dangers visible. That's next week.
All right, Lisa, thank you for that. And coming up, the big impact a fentanyl detox center has made in Oregon since it opened its doors a year ago. And we have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin with progress made against fentanyl overdoses in Oregon.
This is the Portland Detox Center for Recovery Works Northwest. According to its director of engagement, it's the only Measure 110 funded medically monitored withdrawal facility in Northwest Oregon.
With this really modest investment that came through Measure 110, we were able to expand the capacity for detox in the Portland metro area by about 20%.
In its infancy, he said they've been able to administer 1,000 treatments and help about 900 individuals. From his work with patients, he knows fentanyl is incredibly available.
They are also incredibly inexpensive. So a user can find in many corners of Portland, throughout the metro area and the state of Oregon, can find these counterfeit pharmaceutical tablets for about $1 a piece.
In a razor-thin race, who wins the White House could come down to Nevada, and the candidates aren't shy about vying for votes in Las Vegas. Each side equally passionate about who should win the White House and why.
I'm going to be honest, I voted for Biden last time. My pocketbook is not happy. It seems like the world is very unstable, and my eyes have been opened to the truth of things.
It's gaslighting to say that the Biden administration is responsible for that, because that all started back with the pandemic. So we know that. The pandemic and everything, our supply line, and who controls that. So stop saying that it's their fault to do that, and let's look at how we're going to fix it.
Even though Nevada isn't a border state, immigration here is a huge issue. Meanwhile, a crucial nationwide issue, reproductive rights, will be on the ballot here in November.
The small village of Lockland, Ohio, grappling with a strain on resources. Village leaders say they're at a tipping point with the number of asylum seekers in that town, possibly up to 3,000, almost doubling the population. We asked Lockland's administrator what he'd tell politicians if they would listen.
Help. Right? I mean, there has to be something, right? A meeting, it's a federal issue that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed before it's too late.
And coming up, a new motivation to get to class. Why students at one Midwest university are gearing up to float while they learn. Take a look at this, a real rarity, a new state-of-the-art classroom that floats. Yes, this is the boat that's almost ready to serve as a classroom for students at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. It's a research vessel that's been over a year in the making with the help of lots of donations. She does have a name, Sadie Ann, and she's expected to be used by students at the university and also K-12 students in the area. Really just taking the learning to the great outdoors, and we love to see it. It sure beats sitting in a classroom at a desk. That does it for this edition of the National News Desk. Join us again this evening for more coverage on America's top stories. I'm Amira David, and have yourself a wonderful weekend.